Chapter 6. Jade watched the sun set slowly in 1767. The Chateau de Bellevue stood ominously behind her in the distance. And though, yes, she knew Traveler was back there somewhere, keeping tabs on her, for some reason, it was absolutely no comfort. Jade peered around to see the expressions of these dwindling magical princesses change. Once the spells began, it was as if they all went brain dead, zombified. Going through the motions, she swatted away a mosquito as she felt sweat begin to bead and trickle around her neck and chest in an uncomfortable French court dress. It was beautiful. Typical Rococo style, strapless strays cut high at the armpit, a grand habit de cour, or stiff-bodied gown, a pretty crimson color. But holy hell did it suck in this late summer French heat. She turned her attention back to the strange incantation Latin sunset ceremony. There was the Latin spell of Beltane. Cum saxum, saxorum, endosum, montum, oparum da, enantabellum, inquantantis, draconis, which apparently made great bonfires turn purple and sputter violet flame. All of the high priestesses, courtesan ladies, continued uninterrupted as the bonfire grew in height and heat. The Marquis would be here soon. Jade knew that somehow, in the back of her mind, this was... Flames changed as the spells intensified. Elfurnatar, Dariur, Senandru, Sarig, or Farin Nun. Licks of light danced across Jade's face. First a sangria color, blending gently into magenta. Osririch, Safrir, Tu, Fair Ilchin Mor, Necromba Loon. The fire kept growing, rapidly flickering colors, orchid and mauve and amethyst. In the distance, the sun finally collapsed behind ancient rolling European hills. As the bonfire slowed and stilled, somewhere in the heat, and the confusion and the strangeness of the situation, Jade lost track of time, and when she blinked, suddenly it was Valentine walking out of the fire. He had a hideous grin on his face, as he balled his hands into fists. As he opened them and released his fingers, Jade saw the life essence and energy of the remaining priestesses violently torn from them, as their souls, or whatever that pale, brilliant light may be, was stolen and fed directly into Valentine's palms. Jade's eyes narrowed, and she squinted. Valentine was crackling with unnaturally illuminating orchid flame. Behind his closed eyes, Jade saw electricity crackling, supernovas behind his eyelids. Jade sighed and felt herself a fool. Finally, she understood most of this. After all this hoopla, all this stupid partial paranormal side talk and secretiveness, it all came back to Valentine. He was the Marquis, the one that started this whole time-traveling madness in the first place. He'd placed himself in strategic places and points along the narrative timeline to ensure his very existence and momentum of power. And this place, this era, this moment was where it all began. She stared at the impossible enemy. Valentine's eyes opened to reveal two binary stars, full of light and rage and heat. Blasts of non-linear, non-directional brilliance and energy erupted all around. Jade was thrown back into a tree, hard. Her consciousness spinning, her head swimming and her ears ringing. Jade found herself on all fours, breathless, as this temporal mortar approached her with an ire of an ancient and wrathful god. Jade looked up at him as he towered over her. Valentine's eyes. His eyes were lightning. With the Marquis closing in on her, Jade did what she was best at. She survived. With the power she could find within herself, she tapped into every angry moment, every intense feeling of unfairness, every moment of righteous rage, and Jade channeled it and shed the most exquisite and beautiful eruption of time energy she could muster. To her credit, Valentine was taken back, frozen, for a time. At first, He seemed to age to the point of dust, but he just came back, built himself, rejuvenated. Jade shook her head as she smiled with eyes glowing white. He laughed as he slowly approached. Now, she knew he was enjoying this. The Marquis, Valentine, truly was sociopathic, and now he had all the power he needed. She screamed, not in fear, but in anger, desperately pouring all she had into some sort of offensive, a massive wave of pure temporal energy. It stopped. Everything. But it took everything, every ounce of will she could muster, and she could tell the cost had been way too high. Jade felt something leave her. Some part of her vanished, never to return. And as she knelt, panting, her chest heaving, beads of sweat caked her body with moisture in every nook and cranny as she looked up at him, as he struggled against the time wave. Jade tried to stand. Her joints ached. Her skin felt tight and thinner. Her hair even seemed weak on her head. She felt like she had just aged 20 years. She felt so weak. Valentine was slowly unraveling himself from the time bomb she'd set off. Jade struggled through the pain to her feet, desperately trying to make a dead run for Chateau de Bellevue, despite her protesting, arthritic legs and never fully expanding lungs. Her most powerful attack, her best offensive, and the most it did to Valentine was slow him down. As she picked up speed, adjusting to the older body suddenly handed to her, she became really pissed at time magicians, or paradox sorcerers, or whatever the hell Mr. Blue had called them. But mostly, through the chaos in her mind, and the knee-jerk reaction of always being angry about everything all the time, Jade finally made contact with an emotion she had not felt in some time. Fear. Jade was, somewhere deep inside her, genuinely terrified. The acreage across the courtyard tore her ligaments as she could feel Valentine gaining on her. Chateau de Bellevue was bathed in a fiery crimson glow of Beltane sunset. Every window seemed reflected flame, yet the courtyard was empty. Her lungs, in excruciating excess of use, suddenly burdened by decades, forced her to stop in front of the main foyer. As in the perfect nightmare, Valentine was slowly gaining on her in the distance, his steps sparking purple electricity in slow motion. His face was twisted, self-serving grin. All around her in this eerie, absent palace estate was beauty and grandiose sculpture and decadence. Yet not a single person, not a single animal, not a single sound. Where was everyone? Had Valentine killed everybody already? Was she alone? Was any of this even real? The exceptional latticework of the intricate royal oak doors were no comfort, despite their beauty, as they wouldn't yield to let her in the Chateau de Bellevue. Valentine was on his way, the primordial temporal marauder. She just punched through the glass. Shards, shredding her forearm. Blood gushed all over the floor as she twisted the ancient bronze key to open the door. Jade slid on a trail of her own warm crimson, which continued in a hot flow of some artery she wasn't even aware she severed. Landed on broken glass. Suddenly, Valentine was right there, smiling. She screamed, scrambling up to her feet, sliding on slicing splinters and her own blood, desperately trying to get more space. Jade made a dead run behind the massive grand marble staircase. Where the hell was everyone? Where was Traveler? Valentine suddenly gripped her shoulders at the top of the entrance to the basement. How had he made it there that fast? His fingers dug into her, crushing her. She remembered feeling the exact terror, in the exact way, in the graveyard so very long ago. The wrathful angel clutching at her. Jade made a desperate jump backward, spun, created a sphere of crackling temporal energy, and threw it brutally and perfectly in Valentine's face. His screech was high and inhuman. She saw cracks of purple light in his face as it shattered. Finally, after sailing in the air for what seemed like an eternity, the impact of the stone cellar floor was unforgiving as it welcomed her with 2 broken ribs, a crushed wrist, and a concussion. Then, Jade finally heard the familiar British expletives of traveler. In a haze, she could see the blurry outlines of Mr. Blue, the time agent lady, and someone else. A shadow. A dark silhouette. Mr. Blue ran to Jade, scooped up her broken, beaten, and battered form. Saber took her instantly, without pretense or permission. The time agent mumbled a strange series of mathematical incantations, and a piece of psychic glass appeared in her hand. From out of nowhere, Saber ran it over her quickly. "We don't have time for that," the stranger in black stated gruffly as he typed something on his watch. "She's barely conscious. Lost a lot of blood." Saber ignored him, turned to Mr. Blue. "Jade is not doing well at all. Massive internal hemorrhaging. We need to get her to purge." Valentine suddenly floated down the stairs. The time magician was encased in glowing, crackling light. Trails of sangria and iris electricity snaked around the antechamber basement tomb. "Congratulations, you bloody asshole! The bait pot worked out just fine!" Mr. Blue roared at the stranger in black, enraged to the point that saliva flung from his maw. Mr. Black turned to the young Time Lord, almost got out something witty before Valentine blasted the side of his face with searing, crackling orchid time lightning. Valentine laughed. Saber ducked and tried to dive to the nearest TARDIS, the black one shaped like an Egyptian obelisk. The paradox sorcerer's explosive pulse sent Saber tumbling backward with the injured and now passed out Jade. "Oh, you son of a bitch!" Half of his face a skeleton, the stranger in black ran at Valentine, his watch stretching out a grid of green light, encompassing his entire left arm in a massive, powerful gauntlet, which he slammed into the time magician's gut. Mr. Blue knelt at Jade's side. She was easily 50, maybe 60 years old now, her gorgeous ember of youth unnaturally faded before its time into gray. The paradox mage and the time traveler in black grappled. Endless blasts and pulses and explosions of emerald erupted into the background, as if the fate of existence itself hung in the balance. Saber turned and stood, facing the oncoming fissure in reality that she knew was coming. Her eyes glazed over, a shining chrome, reflective, as if encased in some strange armor. She uttered a high proto-language, nigh incomprehensible series of quantum mathematical formula. Her katana appeared in her hand. Saber looked down at Mr. Blue, who appeared to be somewhere between mournfully crying and exploding in rage. She sighed, held her weapon and looked at it, then went to work. As the two faced off against the most powerful version of this temporal sorcerer, Mr. Blue gently ran his fingers through the gray hair of Jade, her youth stolen, her body broken. He simply could not take it any more, and the time-traveling stranger finally admitted to himself, after everything this woman had done for him, and everything he had put her through, he loved her. Mr. Blue loved Jade. Finally he knew. Now he was being forced to watch her die. In the battle being fought for the existence of temporal Nexus Point Earth, Mr. Blue found a moment of stillness to truly look at the woman he loved, truly feel it. A tear fell from his face and landed on Jade's forehead. He gently laid her head down and stood. Mr. Blue was only 122 years old. He had only felt this before. This anger, this loss, once. When Gallifrey fell. No more. He ran into the fray, turning his watch into a laser sword. The battle was fierce as Mr. Blue, the man in black, and Saber joined their forces in a combined front against the constantly gaining time magician. For every slice of a laser sword, there was a counter. Every attacking wave of temporal fissure, meant to encase in a time loop, was answered with a recursive polarity to cancel it out. For every static time shock discharge from the Time Lord's watch, there was a feedback emboitment to nullify it. It was a truly magnificent and powerful fray, a tremendous time battle that harkened back to the ancient days when Razalon fought the great vampires. But ennobled and well-intentioned it may have been, they simply were not enough. They had fought the Marquis, the Valentine, centuries later when he was younger. Yet, Valentine was a paradox. Now, here at his very beginning, he was his oldest, at his most experienced, most dangerous prime. Valentine was most powerful when he was just created, for, as the Nightmare Child, the Faction Paradox, and the Clockwork Soldiers had proven, time is not, was not, nor ever will be, a straight line of casualty. It would appear that way on the surface, but appearances are deceiving after all. The salty wet tear of a Time Lord containing all the fear and love and anger of the moment, carried perhaps by gravity or something else, slid its way down Jade's forehead to her eye. Jade awoke.